problem. Nobody got hurt. Everything was fine. It happened in the Lakeview neighborhood of Chicago after our Pride parade. But of course, because it was mostly Black teenagers out in the streets, local news had to turn it into a violent takeover of the city streets. Now, the framing and headlines speak for themselves. Let's start with WGN TV News and what they tweeted out. Hundreds of teens take over Lakeview, destroying neighborhood. Destroying the neighborhood. And here's some more from Chicago local news. Terrifying. Hundreds of teens take over Lakeview, damage property. Now, the only thing that they're talking about that was damaged property was a dent in the hood of a car that they were dancing on top of. Now, I don't suggest that people go and step on top of vehicles that they don't own. But with that said, I don't see these headlines saying horrifying takeover of city property damage every time there's a car accident or anything like that. Now, one Chicago alderman responded with strategies to think up in the future, to keep the youth from celebrating anything in the future. Now, Alderman Bennett Lawson, 44th Ward, helped with the cleanup Tuesday morning and released a statement saying, I'll be meeting with the 19th District Police, CTA, and others to discuss what took place and identify ways we can prevent it from occurring moving forward, as well as continue conversations with my colleagues on city council and how we can keep our youth from participating in these disruptive actions. Well, I can actually quite easily tell you how you can stop this disruptive behavior, and that's to actually have programs for our youth in the city and things for them to do. But that being said, there's no cleanup. It's a ridiculous idea that there was any cleanup from this. The neighborhood isn't destroyed. I can promise you that. I've seen it with my own eyes. Everything is fine. But there was literally people calling for the police to go in there and shoot these kids. And I mean, I've seen a woman throw up in the middle of the street, pull her pants down and pee, and then punch a cop in this neighborhood because the Cubs won or they lost. I saw a man pick up a garbage can and throw it through a car windshield after a Cubs game. But because those are white people and they're paying to go to Wrigley Field, it's fine. That's not a hostile takeover.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm glad you went there because you and I have to acknowledge what these kids did wrong, being they're not white kids who are celebrating their favorite professional team or college team either winning or losing. Had that been the case, this would be a non-issue. It would just be, look at them having fun. Look at them celebrating a win or a loss. But I mean, I don't know, are people jealous that they can't twerk on top of a Toyota? Maybe you should practice a little bit more. Not condoning getting on someone else's car, but if you have your own car, practice on your own property. That's all I'm saying.
Right, and I said something to that effect, and I had a bunch of people replying like, "Oh, well, I'm gonna bring these kids to in front of your house next time and see how you react." And like, "Oh no, people dancing. Whatever will I do?" I mean, it is ridiculous and it's thoroughly racist. I'm glad we got to cover these stories together, though. Jeff, thanks for being on with me, and everyone, make sure to check out Jeff's work and check out his Rebel HQ videos. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. We'll be back tomorrow, of course, with more watch lists, but stick around because the main show is next.
Welcome to TYT. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian, on this lovely Wednesday afternoon, well, evening, depending on where you're at. We've got a fantastic show ahead for you today. I'm super excited to share the news with you. Later on, we're gonna talk a little bit about House Speaker Kevin McCarthy's pathetic cowardice. I mean, the guy just embarrassed himself so much over the last 24 hours, and I'll explain what he did in just a few. We'll also talk a little bit about the Airbnb collapse and what that means for the housing market. It's Wednesday, of course, I'm gonna try to squeeze in a housing story if I can. And we'll also discuss how a pregnancy crisis center, one of those anti-abortion, pro-religion clinics, nearly killed a woman who ended up having an ectopic pregnancy. They're now facing a lawsuit. We'll give you the details on that story and more. But you gotta stick around for the second hour, because when John Iadarola comes to join me, we're gonna talk about yet another good Supreme Court ruling, an anti-corporate Supreme Court ruling, what? Okay, so that's really good news. Can't wait to share that with you as well. But before we get started on any of this fun stuff, just want to encourage you guys to like and share the stream if you're watching us on YouTube. You can also become a member by clicking on that join button if you're watching us on YouTube, or you can go to tyt.com/join to become a member. Members get all sorts of goodies, all sorts of exclusive content, but more importantly, they keep us honest and independent from any corporate influence, and for that, I am forever grateful. All right, without further ado, let's get to our first story. Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Greene has been very busy, not with governing or legislating or doing anything to improve the lives of the constituents who live in her district in Georgia, but she has been busy calling her colleague, Lauren Boebert, a little bitch. And to keep the embarrassing reality show going, Greene makes her rounds in the media only to brag about her high school catfight on national television.
According to CNN, Daily Beast, and others, you accused your Republican colleague, Lauren Boebert, on the House floor of stealing or copying your impeach Biden resolution, and then called her a nasty little bitch. And I only use that word because you've confirmed it. Is this the media loving a cat fight? Because you haven't exactly shied away from this.
Well, I find it unfortunate that Lauren Boebert leaked that conversation that we had to the press. But once she leaked it out, I had to confirm that that's in fact what I said.
Oh, wow. Boebert must have done something particularly nasty. Maybe she stood in the way of legislation that would have materially improved the lives of Americans, and that's what Greene is upset about. But no, of course not. Their little conflict stemmed from performative anti-Biden nonsense.
I had asked her to co-sponsor my articles of impeachment against Joe Biden on the border, and she never responded and apparently refused to do so. Then when she introduced her own and forced them to the floor with a privilege resolution without even having the courage to talk to any other Republican in our conference before doing so, except Speaker McCarthy and apparently a few others, yeah, we had a tense conversation when she confronted me about things I had said about it. But this is unfortunate that this becomes public on the House floor.
Look, I don't really care about the juvenile crap that these women are engaging in, especially when Americans are faced with so many devastating challenges. Consumer debt is at an all-time high. Housing is unaffordable and out of reach for countless Americans. Homelessness has skyrocketed in recent years. Our hellish healthcare system is in desperate need of reform. And when it comes to these very real issues, Greene, much like her GOP colleagues, has ensured that she stands in the way of any positive change. Now, even the White House is calling her out on it. It all started this week when the Rome News Tribune ran a front page article highlighting a more than $1 million federal public safety grant that Greene's hometown of Floyd County is set to accept. The federal funds were appropriated as part of the American Rescue Plan that Biden signed into law in March of 2021. The problem is Greene, along with every other House Republican, voted no on the bill. In fact, Greene pulled a stunt in an attempt to delay passage of the bill. Greene drew bipartisan ire after she called for a vote to adjourn the House of Representatives in an attempt to delay final passage of President Biden's $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan. Considering Greene voted, against the bill, the White House wasn't so amused when she was getting credit for the passage in her local paper. According to The Hill, the Biden administration took a well-deserved shot at Greene over her no vote. White House spokesperson Robin Patterson, told The Hill in a statement that, quote, President Biden is proud of the resources he's provided to stand up for the rule of law, crack down on gun crimes, and keep cops on the beat in Floyd County and across the country. Unlike Representative Marjorie Greene, who voted against this funding, as well as to defund federal law enforcement and fire thousands of Border Patrol agents, President Biden is committed to ensuring law enforcement has the resources they need to keep Northwest Georgians safe. Greene tried to throw her own jabs at the White House, arguing that Biden's alleged laxed border policies are hurting public safety in her state of Georgia. But while Republican lawmakers like Greene like to center their re-election campaigns on the need for public safety and border control, they consistently vote against it. They vote against funding it. The White House has accused House Republicans of opposing funding for law enforcement with their votes against the American Rescue Plan and of cutting funding for border security when they supported the debt limit plan the conference approved in April. And guess what? Those accusations are correct. I'm not some big supporter of President Biden. I've got deep issues with him. But remember that big debt ceiling fight between Biden and Republican House leadership? Well, thanks to Republicans pretending they're concerned about the federal debt, the debt deal caps spending on government programs to 2023 levels. That means that the Department of Homeland Security, which is tasked with border control, is actually getting a funding cut in 2024 when you adjust for inflation. But it gets worse. The bill cuts so-called non-defense discretionary, which includes domestic law enforcement, forest management, scientific research, and more for the 2024 fiscal year. It would limit all discretionary spending to 1% growth in 2025, which is effectively a budget cut because that is projected to be slower than the rate of inflation. This is what Greene wanted, so she can spare us the BS scaremongering about the southern border. What's incredible, though, is that even Stephen Miller, the architect of Trump's most brutal anti-immigration policies, was on board with cutting border control spending as part of the debt ceiling bill. Believe it or not, the guy behind ripping children away from their asylum-seeking parents at the border is even calling Greene a warrior.
This is a $2 trillion spending cut. And I will say, if you look at who is supporting it, he's got Jim Jordan and Marjorie Taylor Greene out there, two conservative warriors on his behalf fighting for this thing.
Later in the interview, Miller even admits that spending cuts impact security at the border, but alleges that the GOP will secure more funding for DHS through future appropriations bills.
And then we come back in the appropriations process and we seal the border. We defund critical race theory. We demolish the deep state at the DOJ and in the intelligence and security states.
Right. I mean, just keep in mind right now, the backdrop is the Republican Party arguing that there is literally a crisis, an invasion at our southern border, okay? But he's like, it's okay. I mean, yeah, we're gonna cut some spending and then maybe later on we'll get the spending back through, appropriations bills, which, is laughable considering the gridlock in Congress and Biden's ability to veto any bill he doesn't like. But more importantly, this story should force you to ask a few critical questions. What do elected lawmakers really stand for? And what are they really up to as they say one thing publicly and vote against what they claim to care about most? Are they sincere about anything? Or are they just interested in endless performative garbage that does nothing to improve your life? It's an open and shut case with lawmakers like Greene. Her fight with Boebert isn't about improving your safety or economic conditions. Greene just doesn't want Boebert to outshine her in baseless Biden impeachment efforts. So next time she whines about public safety or illegal immigration, she should answer for why she refuses to put her money where her mouth is. Now, there's other news today. It's a little bit of a heavy Republican dunking show because they're just providing a lot of material today. And this next story has a lot to do with the cowardice, the ongoing cowardice among Republican lawmakers in the face of Donald Trump. So let's talk about it. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sad to say that there is a serious and unmitigated masculinity crisis in America, and we must address it. Allow me to present Exhibit A. Over the last 24 hours, Republican House Speaker Kevin McCarthy was effortlessly unmanned by former President Donald Trump. Apparently, McCarthy engaged in discourse that Daddy Trump and his supporters found insulting, leading to multiple attempts at walking back his insanely mild statements. McCarthy's humiliating debacle was sparked by a recent appearance on CNBC, where he was asked whether he thought Trump would be the best Republican presidential nominee to beat Biden. Here's how that exchange went down.
If he wins the primary, do you think he can win the general? And is it good for the Republican Party if Donald Trump is the nominee? Look, and then I want to get to Biden and his malarkey defense and all that stuff.
Can Trump beat Biden? Yeah, he can beat Biden.
Is that a good thing for the Republican Party if Donald Trump is the...
The Republicans get to select their nominee. I think if you want to go sheer policy to policy, it's not good for Republicans, it's good for America. Trump's policies are better, straightforward than Biden's.
It makes it complicated if he's got all these trials and all this stuff overhanging.
It makes it complicated, also helps him when...
But do you think he could win an election? Could he win an election?
Can he win that election? Yeah, he can.
You think he can?
The question is he the strongest to win the election? I don't know that answer, but can anybody beat Biden? Yeah, anybody can beat Biden. Can Biden beat other people? Yes, Biden can beat him.
That was it, that was all he said. I mean, can you imagine being offended by that? Having skin so thin that you hear that mild statement and think to yourself, oh my God, I can't believe that he trashed me on national television. McCarthy's statement at the tail end of that clip is what set the MAGA world off, simply admitting that the House leader is unsure if Trump is the best potential GOP nominee and that there is a chance that Biden could beat him again, infuriated loyalists to the former president. Politico reports that Trump world flipped out. Top aides to the former president and allies who know both men quickly traded messages asking in short, what the F? Some called McCarthy a moron, which is true. Others looked to Trump campaign hand Brian Jack, who also advises the speaker and has been a critical bridge between both men, to play mediator. They're going to couples therapy as Trump hit the trail in New Hampshire. What happened next was an unmanning of epic proportions. Politico reports that McCarthy immediately pivoted to cleanup mode. McCarthy offered Breitbart reporter Matt Boyle an exclusive interview to walk back his statements in a panic. The headline for the piece alone is hilarious, reading that McCarthy believes Trump, with all his baggage and indictments, is stronger today than he was in 2016. He cited one poll to make his case, arguing that, quote, the only reason Biden is using his weaponized federal government to go after President Trump is because he is Biden's strongest political opponent, as polling continues to show. Right, McCarthy, I'm sure it has nothing to do with the fact that Donald Trump had multiple opportunities to hand over classified and top secret documents that the federal government knew he had in his possession, but he refused to do it, continued to lie. I'm sure that had nothing to do with it. He continues to say, in the context of this Breitbart interview, just look at the numbers this morning. Trump is stronger today than he was in 2016. He continued citing a Morning Consult poll showing Trump ahead of Biden in a hypothetical rematch of the 2020 presidential election, 44% to Biden's 41%. As if he wasn't embarrassing himself enough though, McCarthy engaged in even more groveling to appease Trump and his supporters.
He held a called the former president yesterday to apologize, according to new reporting from our colleagues Melanie Zanona and Kristen Holmes, where he both apologized, he told the former president that he misspoke, and of course, he blamed reporters for taking the comments out of context, according to McCarthy. His campaign sent out a fundraising email saying that Donald Trump was stronger than ever. This just goes to show you that Kevin McCarthy knows that his right flank is so important for him to hold on to his speakership. He cannot anger people in his conference who are getting behind the former president, who are fervently behind him at all times, no matter what that means in terms of defending Donald Trump. And that is why Kevin McCarthy went out of his way yesterday to go ahead and apologize to the former president, and then in subsequent interviews make it clear that he does believe Donald Trump could be a strong contender to beat Joe Biden.
McCarthy bowing his head to Trump isn't new. He's done this before. Following the January 6 Capitol riots, McCarthy argued that Trump bore responsibility for inciting his supporters.
The president bears responsibility for Wednesday's attack on Congress by mob rioters. He should have immediately denounced the mob when he saw what was unfolding. These facts require immediate action by President Trump. Accept his share of responsibility, quell the brewing unrest, and ensure President-elect Biden is able to successfully begin his term.
An audio recording also confirmed that McCarthy told his fellow Republican leaders that he was seriously thinking about recommending that Trump resign in the wake of January 6th. In the January 10th meeting, Wyoming Representative Liz Cheney, who was the chairwoman of the Republican conference at the time, asks McCarthy if there's any chance Trump would resign. He responds by saying, quote, "My gut tells me no. I'm seriously thinking about having that conversation with him tonight. I haven't talked to him in a couple of days." McCarthy goes on to tell his leadership team that the impeachment resolution being crafted by Democrats would pass in the House, and that he believes it might pass in the Senate as well. As we all now know, the Senate refused to convict Trump, but at the time, McCarthy told his Republican colleagues the following: "The only discussion I would have with him is that I think this will pass, and it would be my recommendation you should resign. That would be my take, but I don't think he would take it." And look, it didn't take much to bully McCarthy to submission. He changed course after MAGA expressed rage over McCarthy's statements. He ran over to Mar-a-Lago to beg Trump for forgiveness. And look at this pathetic and weak shell of a man. Since Trump loves to make grown men grovel at his feet, he made sure to snap a photo with McCarthy and blast it out online. That's what you're looking at now. For me, this isn't about Trump. It's about the cowardice that stems from the only thing that Kevin McCarthy seems to care about, himself. And there are dozens just like him in Congress, honestly, on both sides of the aisle. McCarthy's political career and leadership role is so important to him that he'll do and say anything to remain in Trump's good graces. He's an empty vessel. He stands for nothing. And while it's clear that he wants to maintain power, what good is that power if you can never wield it for what you believe in? I don't know if McCarthy has any values at all, but if he does, he's definitely brushing them aside to publicly uplift someone he obviously despises privately. That's not strength. It's weak, unprincipled, and pathetic. So the next time Republicans want to share their concerns about the masculinity crisis in America, I suggest they look inward first. We got to take a quick break. When we come back, we've got more news for you, including what's currently transpiring with Airbnb, its potential collapse, and the housing market. And don't miss this insane story about a pregnancy crisis center in Massachusetts, leading to a severe health complication for a woman who just wanted to get an ultrasound. That and more coming up. Don't miss it. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Just want to read some comments from our YouTube members. I'm gonna start with Daniel Hall, who became a member. Just watched yesterday's bonus episode. Is it a surprise that a generation that grew up in post 9/11 America wants to hold on to their childhood? I don't know if 9/11 has anything to do with it. I don't know if that story was the right context in which I should have shared my frustrations with something I'm noticing about younger generations, but I think I was too judgmental. I'm not necessarily apologizing for it, but I don't think there's anything wrong with collecting squishmallows as an adult. Do you, boo? Don't really care. Dragons Marine says, the bribery list of my representative is a year of CVS receipts long. I don't doubt it. Bach says, all Trump needed to do in the last election was ask his constituents to vote by mail and he would have won. Thank you for making that point. I think there's a lot to that point. And look, I think that it would be a mistake for Biden to underestimate Trump if it does indeed end up becoming a matchup between Trump and Biden. So when you look at Ron DeSantis, when you look at the other contenders, I don't know. I mean, Ron DeSantis is so uncharismatic. He's so awkward. I don't think he's gonna do all that well. I think that Trump in the primaries during these debates is going to crush him. I do think it's probably gonna end up being a race between Biden and Trump. And I think that Trump still has a really good chance, even with all of the baggage that comes along with him, even with the indictments. So we'll see what happens. All right, moving over to our super chats. LJ Wombology says, Solo Wednesday returns, the alpha males are back. Thank you for saying that. Frank writes in and says, government solved your problems yet? Time to wise up, individualize your energy, and forget the failures. All right, we've got Thomas Daniel who says, I heard a rumor Marjorie Greene is an advocate for green energy on the basis of her riding her broom to work every day. Okay, my husband's in the studio and he just laughed at that. That was really funny. All right, we've got Stinky Feet, LB, Lauren Boebert versus Marjorie Greene. It's like watching two 1-year-olds fight over a toy. I take that back. It's insulting to 1-year-olds. I hear that, definitely. All right, to our Twitch subs, special thanks to all of you. Caretaker 909 writes in and says, it's Mean Girls Congress edition. And it's incredibly embarrassing for the rest of us. Rye, the therapy dragon, says corporations want us to focus on these two, not on any substantial problem Anna just mentioned. You are 1000% right about that. In fact, in the second hour, there's this great story with the Washington Post doing this analysis of what the Republican presidential candidates, which words they're using the most as they're doing their campaigning. And every single one of them is just knee deep in culture war garbage. And that's it. I mean, it is a distraction. It's a way of getting people to fight over cultural differences, as honestly, both parties aid and abet these corporations in doing what they do best, robbing us. So we've got that story and more later in the second hour. Stick around for that. For now, let's go back to the show. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to TYT. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian. I just want to read one quick comment from one of our viewers in our Twitch community. Dr. Hayes says, that's how Kevin McCarthy got where he is, groveling like a little bitch. Fair point, fair point. But I just don't really understand how people so obsessed with power would put themselves in a position where they're being overpowered by individual and controlled by people they can't stand. And that's exactly what's happening with Republican lawmakers right now. I'll never forget the kind of commentary I heard about Trump when I was in Pennsylvania to debate Ben Shapiro before the Pennsylvania Chamber of Commerce. They can't stand the guy, but they won't say it publicly because they're terrified of him. It's really incredible. All right, with that said, I've been itching for another housing story, and that is what you're about to hear about right now. Let's get to it. Airbnb is collapsing, and that might translate to some good news in our ongoing housing crisis. But before we can really understand why, we need to take a look at the housing market as a whole. In an effort to highlight the absolutely dire nature of the housing crisis, Zillow released new data that shows that the United States is short by more than 4 million housing units. The study, which included both homes for sale and rental properties, reveals that the housing shortage in America is so severe that the number of Americans looking to move out on their own outnumbered available housing by nearly 2 to 1. There were roughly 8 million individuals or families who lived in another person's home in 2021, and just 3.7 million homes for rent or sale, leaving a deficit of 4.3 million homes. And it should come as no surprise that these housing deficits are notably worse in some parts of the country, such as Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Jose, San Diego, and Boston. I mean, California not doing too well, let's just keep it real. Take a look at this chart from Zillow, which lists cities with the worst shortages. New York tops the list with a housing deficit of more than 376,000 units. Los Angeles comes in at a close second with a shortage of nearly 334,000 houses or housing units. San Francisco, Boston, DC, and Seattle also top the chart with each in need of hundreds of thousands of housing units. Thanks to the explosion of remote work and super low interest rates on mortgages, housing availability and affordability took a massive hit during the pandemic. Keep in mind that homes were already in short supply to begin with. So demand rising sharply during the pandemic pushed the housing prices to record highs. During the pandemic, both rents and sale prices soared. In the last year, typical rents rose by close to 5%, up to $2,048 per month, while the value of a typical home jumped to nearly $347,000. Now, Zillow argues that the only way out of this mess is to have policymakers focus their efforts on loosening zoning regulations and other governmental red tape in order to boost construction. Researchers suggest that speeding up building permitting, tax incentives to rehabilitate underutilized housing stock, and expanding affordable housing trust funds could all help ease the shortfall in new construction. But we can't just blindly call for the construction of new housing without some safeguards in place. A senior economist at Zillow makes clear that new construction needs to focus on the types of houses that ordinary Americans can afford rather than the astronomically priced luxury real estate that's been developed over the last few decades. He argues that there are simply not enough homes for millions of people. Unless we address the shortage of smaller, more affordable starter type homes, we risk leaving families without a seat, and it will only get worse over time. And it has been getting worse year after year. The housing crisis seems to be exacerbated by this housing crisis and shortage. It's true that those who happen to be lower in the socioeconomic status are hit hardest by the housing shortage. The bulk of families doubling up have consistently lower incomes, highlighting the need for smaller, more affordable housing. Of the families that are doubling up, 68% had an annual income of just $35,000 or less. So in addition to loosening zoning regulations, we also have to make sure that policymakers restrict construction to affordable housing. Luckily, there are some positive developments with new housing construction. Housing starts jumped to an annual rate of 1.63 million units last month, up from 1.34 million in April, according to Census Bureau data. Single family and multifamily construction experienced monthly increases as well. Now, single family starts jumped by 18.5% over revised April figures to a rate of 997,000 units, while starts for buildings with 5 or more units was 624,000. But look, it's also worth focusing just a little bit on vacant homes, which continue to drive people like me absolutely insane. Now, Zillow's analysis found that while there is a deficit of 4.3 million housing units, there are an estimated 12 million vacant homes. of the nearly 12 million housing units that were not available for rent or for sale, only 6.3 million vacant units had either recently been purchased, rented, or were for the owner's occasional use. That leaves 5.6 million vacant homes that aren't available. Now, Zillow believes that most of the vacant housing is inhabitable, meaning that they're in good enough condition for people to actually live in. So why are they sitting empty while we're dealing with a severe housing shortage? Now, the census did its own analysis just a month ago in late May. They found that most vacant housing is seasonal. These are vacation homes for the haves, as the have-nots struggle to put a roof over their heads. In 645 of the nation's 3,143 counties, seasonal units made up at least 50% of the vacant housing. In 1,313 counties, seasonal units outnumbered the combined total number of units for rent or sale that were vacant. Riverside County, California, Broward and Miami-Dade counties in Florida, and Maricopa County in Arizona had more vacant units that were for seasonal, recreational, or occasional use than vacant units for rent or for sale. Which brings me to the ongoing collapse of Airbnb. Now, revenues for the San Francisco-based company have dropped by nearly 50% in cities like Phoenix, Arizona, and Austin, Texas, suggesting that the company might be facing an unfolding crisis. This is according to recent data from All the Rooms, comparing Airbnb profits in May of 2022 and May of 2023. The short-term rental industry is absolutely struggling, and if owners of these properties end up selling these homes, it could significantly increase inventory in some parts of the country. Let's take a look at the areas hit hardest by the so-called Airbnb collapse. The chart that you're gonna look at right here was put together by Nick Jurley, who is the CEO of Venture Consulting, which provides advice to home buyers. The chart shows that cities that have seen significant drops this year compared to 2022 are San Antonio, Texas, with a 43.8% decline in revenue, Nashville, Tennessee, with a 39% drop, Denver, Colorado, with a 38.6% drop, New Orleans with a 37% drop, and Seattle, Washington with a 35.2% drop in revenue. All data was calculated as a 3-month average revenue per listing for May of 2023 compared to May of 2022. Now, Jurley added that the collapse in revenue for Airbnb might force the owners of these properties to essentially, sell the homes. But he thinks that's actually bad news for the housing market. And it is bad news for some people. If you're looking to put your house up for sale and suddenly there's this massive influx of homes on the market, you might have more difficulty selling the home. I mean, it's just simple supply and demand. You might end up selling it for less than what you would have gotten if Airbnb wasn't collapsing and if Airbnb property owners weren't putting their homes on the market. Now, in a subsequent tweet, though, he argues that what's scary for the US housing market is just how many Airbnbs there are. Data from All the Rooms shows 1 million Airbnb and Vrbo rentals compared to only 570,000 homes for sale. This creates huge home price downside if struggling Airbnb owners elect to sell. And I hope they do elect to sell. In the case of Phoenix, Jurley wrote, the number of short-term rentals estimated at 18,000 is more than double the number of homes for sale, an estimated 8,000. Mix the huge Airbnb supply with revenues down 50% and you get a cocktail for massive forced selling, he tweeted. All right, let's just break that down for you. Here's the translation. This could lead to more inventory of homes on the market, which would lower housing prices. And for those who had the means to invest in short-term rental properties in the quest for passive income, they should know that real estate speculation is sometimes pretty risky. And you might lose money if you're forced to sell your investment during an economic downturn. Local lawmakers, though, should never have allowed the short-term rental industry to grow this large in the first place. As we continue to suffer through a persistent housing shortage, the fact that little to nothing was done to mitigate these investments in order to, preserve housing for those who actually need to live in it tells you a lot about the lack of governance by our elected leaders. All right, we're gonna take a quick break. When we come back, our final story for the first hour, we're gonna talk about an insane story stemming from a pregnancy crisis clinic presenting itself as something that it wasn't and putting a woman's life in jeopardy as a result. Stick around. Welcome back to our social break. Let's check in on our members. First off, thank you to Gail Hefner, who gifted 1 TYT membership. You are a rock star. Thank you for the support. Also, Joni Kinsey is a new TYT member over at YouTube. Welcome. I hope you enjoy our bonus episode today. Freedom House 1984 says, yeah, it's Casper, the friendly host, who knows the most. We've got Vincent Morales who says, oh, we get Anna for a whole hour. I'm going to light some candles. Okay, I was gonna make a joke that was gonna be inappropriate. I'll just move on. Little Tunchi wrote in and said 4 years as a viewer and 23 months as a member, more years to come with TYT. Thank you so much for your support. We wouldn't be able to do any of what we're doing without you guys, honestly. It's an incredibly difficult digital media landscape. A lot of companies have gone under throughout TYT's existence, and you guys have always carried us through everything, and we are forever grateful for that. Let's go to, let's see. Elstasia says, I live in Vancouver, Canada, one of the most expensive places on earth. I swear only half the huge houses in my neighborhood actually have people living in them. Well, Vancouver's an interesting case because much like major cities in the United States, foreign investors were pouring money into real estate in Vancouver, as a way of laundering money in some cases, as a way of sheltering their money from, the governments in their countries. And Vancouver eventually and luckily passed laws that, banned foreign investment in real estate. I don't know if it's had enough of a positive impact, but I wish we had similar legislation here in the United States. But I do think that during times of housing shortages, there needs to be some restriction on investment properties or real estate speculation. We need to prioritize people who need homes to actually live in. You get what I'm saying? All right, let's go to, I read some Twitch subs. Let's go to our members, TYT.com members. We've got Seth who wrote in and said, hey Anna, welcome back. I wore my TYT Pride shirt to Disney Pride last week and several people called out to me with cries of, I don't care what the Bible says and no cookies for you. That's amazing and that makes me really, really happy. If you don't mind, write in again, were you at Disneyland or Disney World? That could make a world of difference. Repect the political cat boy says, if I'm being honest, I think the ones in power are seeing the signs of potential civil unrest growing and are doing their best to stem the tide. That's a fascinating take. I want to hear more about that. So if you don't mind, write in again, elaborate. I love hearing your thoughts and perspectives. We've got 16 seconds. Let me try to read a few more. Catherine writes in and says, how dare McCarthy stop fluffing Trump for a millisecond? I know, right? It's amazing. And Mark Goggins says, McCarthy had manhood to begin with? I guess not. Fair point. Let's get back to the show. I love when you guys write in, whether you're our members, whether you're writing in through a super chat. Your perspectives are always appreciated. Even when there's constructive critique, I always love to hear from you. But I wanted to give you some feedback from on the last story I did about Airbnb collapsing and the housing market. Shai Coltrane 42 in our members section says, Airbnb might go up in flames. This is a good point. But anticipate hedge funds, banks, and real estate flippers to usurp all of these properties. Slumlords are just giddy. Greed is going to greed. I think you make a really good point. In fact, when you take a look at which entities benefited the most following the 2008 housing collapse, you'll get a sense of how this cycle works. And it's a pretty terrible thing to think about. America needs a reboot, says Love and Anna Housing Report. And finally, Eclectic Miscellanea, really good to hear from you, says, so in other words, there isn't really a housing shortage. There are plenty of housing units to go around. Rich people and companies are hoarding them to drive house prices up, while poor and working folk are forced to squeeze into someone else's home or live on the street. So Eclectic, I don't even think it's about them intentionally buying up these homes that they have no intention in living in to drive up housing prices. A lot of these people want like a second home, like a nice little vacation home, which look, I don't begrudge anyone for that. But if we're in the middle of a housing shortage, I do begrudge the government for failing to put safeguards in place to prioritize people who need housing to live in, right? And then there's also the passive income that comes along with, Airbnb rentals, short-term rentals. People are looking for ways to invest and get a return on their investment. I don't think that they're doing this to be nefarious. I think they're doing this because it's an opportunity that they think would be good for them. But if they take advantage of those opportunities and it goes unmitigated by our government, it could lead to the kind of housing crisis we're dealing with right now. So we need to build more housing. And in the meantime, I do think it's important to have some restrictions on people buying up investment properties that they have no intention in living in. We gotta get people housed. That's, in my opinion, one of the most important issues in the country right now. All right, with that said though, another incredibly important issue in the country right now is our reproductive rights. And I wanna give you one particular story that shows just how insanely cruel some of these so-called pregnancy crisis centers are. And if they really care about human life, they sure did put one woman's life in jeopardy. A woman in Massachusetts is suing a so-called pregnancy crisis center for failing to identify and treat an ectopic pregnancy that later landed her in the hospital for emergency surgery. We'll dive deeper into what else these deceptive clinics are and how they're spreading across the country. But first, the details of this case are worth talking about. So the woman known as Jane Doe filed a class action lawsuit on Thursday in the Worcester Superior Court, alleging that Clearway Clinic didn't follow standard medical care. The suit also claims that Clearway engages in deceptive practices to lure in people seeking the full range of pregnancy options, when its actual purpose is just to dissuade them from getting abortions. Now, according to the lawsuit, the woman believed she was pregnant and she wanted to get an ultrasound just to confirm her suspicion. So she did an online search of ultrasound providers and found Clearway's website, which entices people to schedule an ultrasound with the promise of being seen at a state licensed medical clinic by board certified doctors and nurses who will diagnose the pregnancy's viability. Now, thinking that this was a legitimate medical facility that she could trust, the woman booked an appointment through the website, was contacted right away by Clearway, and went in for an appointment later that same day. Now, a nurse at Clearway conducted limited ultrasounds and diagnosed the pregnancy as viable and in utero. The woman was not seen by a Clearway physician, despite being given paperwork upon discharge that her care was provided by a medical doctor. And we've already run into a major red flag here. Nurses are not licensed to read ultrasounds or diagnose pregnancies in the state of Massachusetts. And it turns out that the pregnancy was not, in fact, in her uterus, but rather in her fallopian tube, what's known as an ectopic pregnancy. According to medical professionals, an ectopic pregnancy can't proceed normally. For one, because the fertilized egg can't survive. If the fertilized egg implants in the fallopian tube, it cannot move or be moved to the uterus. It always requires treatment, and that treatment is termination of the pregnancy, abortion. Beyond the fact that these pregnancies aren't viable, they're also extremely dangerous to the mother if they are not treated. Ectopic pregnancies can become life-threatening, especially if your fallopian tube ruptures. It can cause severe bleeding, infection, and sometimes death. This is a medical emergency. Healthcare providers must treat ectopic pregnancies quickly. But since the crisis center failed to inform the woman that her pregnancy was an ectopic pregnancy, it was allowed to keep developing. In November of 2022, the month after Miss Doe visited Clearway, she experienced sharp and shooting pain in her side, causing her to be lightheaded and weak, so much so that she was unable to call 911 for assistance and required her husband to do so. She was rushed to the emergency department at a nearby hospital where she was diagnosed with an ectopic pregnancy and internal hemorrhage caused by the pregnancy's rupture. Because the ectopic pregnancy had ruptured, the medical staff were unable to assess Miss Doe for less invasive treatment of the ectopic pregnancy, causing her to undergo invasive emergency surgery to stop the hemorrhaging, which included the removal of one of her fallopian tubes. Just absolutely brutal, insane. Now, her complaint alleges that Clearway did not adhere to the standard of medical care, which would have led them to diagnose the ectopic pregnancy properly. And because of their failure, she could have died from internal bleeding. Now, Clearway represents itself to the public as a legitimate clinic providing quality care, but its true goal is just to dissuade patients from terminating their pregnancies. On their website, there's a paragraph that reads as follows: "We know you may want to get out of this situation as fast as possible, but this is one of the most important decisions you will ever make. It's not a decision to be made too quickly. At Clearway Clinic, we do not provide or refer for abortions, but we will provide the information you need to make a fully informed choice." Now, they list questions for women considering abortions, like the following: are you being pressured into having an abortion? This is called reproductive coercion. What do you know about emotional complications associated with the abortion procedure? Let's just pause for a second. What do they know about the emotional consequences of being denied quality care, in this case, or being denied, the ability to make decisions about your own body in red states where abortion has been effectively banned? The website has other questions like, have you received help from pain caused by a previous abortion? What do you know about fetal development? Now, all of these questions are framed in a way to make the woman feel guilty if she's considering an abortion, or even question whether or not she'll be mentally stable after having an abortion. Ironically, they also ask on the website, have there been any lawsuits filed against the doctor or the clinic? Interesting. Now, Clearway also provides something called abortion pill reversal for women who regret getting a medication abortion. They claim to have saved hundreds of babies with this treatment, but the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists say it's not based on science and do not meet clinical standards. So this woman who filed the lawsuit was forced to undergo a traumatic and completely avoidable emergency surgery to save her life because she was deceived by a clinic that practices debunked science and has a clear agenda. And unfortunately, these faux clinics are gaining in numbers. The Massachusetts-based group Reproductive Equity Now said anti-abortion centers outnumbered real abortion clinics in the state 3-to-1. Unfortunately, that figure is about the same nationally, but the ratio is even higher in Republican-controlled states. And despite pushing a clear agenda, crisis pregnancy centers, also known as CPCS, receive millions of dollars in taxpayer money every year, so you're likely funding them. Between 2010 and 2022, at least 13 states have funneled roughly $495 million to these pregnancy crisis centers that try to steer women away from having abortions. Texas leads the pack, where $204 million in taxpayer money has been handed over to these clinics since 2010. The good news in the fight for reproductive rights is that all the anti-abortion messaging coming from Republicans looks to be backfiring, even among people in their own right-wing base. According to recent polling, support for abortion rights is higher than it's been in decades. Well over 3/4 of Democrats are in favor of first trimester abortions when the vast majority of abortions happen. Perhaps more surprising to some, half of self-identified conservatives now think abortion should be legal in the first trimester, up from just 39% in 2018. And support for legal abortion care has generally increased among independents since the year 2000. Plus, a poll conducted in late March and early April by the Pew Research Center found that 62% of Americans, including 39% of Republicans, think states are making it too hard rather than too easy to get an abortion. In Florida specifically, where Ron DeSantis passed a 6-week abortion ban, voters in both parties say they want to protect reproductive rights. A University of North Florida poll in March found 75% of the respondents said that they either somewhat or strongly opposed the 6-week ban. That included 61% of Republicans. Look, this is anecdotal evidence, and you should always take anecdotal evidence with a grain of salt, but it does bolster that study or that poll. I was just recently in Florida, and the time I was in Florida prior to that, everyone I spoke to was enamored with Ron DeSantis. All of a sudden, not so much. After the 6-week abortion ban, a lot of the women, conservative women, Republican women that I spoke to there, soured on him. All of a sudden, they weren't in favor of him. So I do think that rolling back reproductive rights played a huge role in how poorly Republicans performed in the midterm elections. I'm curious to see if that is enough to help Democrats in the next presidential election. So Republican candidates like Ron DeSantis and Mike Pence should, maybe think twice before they keep boasting about just how anti-abortion they are and spouting all the ways they already have and plan to continue preventing women from accessing them. Because it ain't playing as well as they think it is. People like their freedom. People like to make decisions about their own bodies. All right, we got to take a break, but when we come back, John Iadarola will be joining me for the second hour. Don't miss it because we have some good news coming out of the Supreme Court. Second day in a row that that's happening. It's kind of shocking. And one of my favorite stories of the day involves a dog. Of course it does. That and more coming up. Don't miss it.
The rest of the news media says you should not fight for positive change. If you do, you're not really a reporter or a journalist because reporters and journalists don't care what happens. I don't agree. That's not written anywhere. That's not a law. It's just a rule that they invented so that reporters didn't actually challenge the people that are in power. Well, we don't agree with that. We think we should challenge the people in power, that actually makes you a better journalist, not a worse one.
Everywhere you look, things are getting more expensive. Here at TYT, we understand this. That's why we're not gonna price gouge you or use inflation as an excuse to raise our prices. A TYT membership is not your typical subscription, but basic membership is still just $4.99. So what do you get for that price? For starters, you're getting exclusive programming, unique exclusive designs from Shop TYT, access to a members only chat, giveaways, emojis, and so many other amazing perks. But most importantly, you're helping to make an impact. As a TYT member, you not only help us do the shows every day, but you drive real positive change in the process. In 2017, we helped to start Justice Democrats right here on TYT. That's a group that got 12 progressives elected into Congress. That's amazing, you did that. Your support also funds TYT's very own investigative reporting. Just recently, our reporters exposed the Fellowship Foundation and pressured lawmakers into boycotting that bigoted event. Isn't that amazing? We raised over $30,000 for Jackson, Mississippi, and delivered clean water to thousands of people in need. Our petitions, polls, and community of activists help keep the corruption of Washington in check. That's the impact of what just $4.99 a month from our members can do. And we're just getting started. Positive change doesn't occur overnight, but with your contribution, we can make it happen together.
I got pulled in. They told me, hey, listen, Cenk, we're insiders. We are the establishment. People in Washington tell me that they're concerned about your tone. We think that there's a better role for you, and it's not in 6 o'clock. The problem with the mainstream media is they're desperate to get access. They don't challenge the government. They don't challenge power. We're supposed to challenge the government. That's the role of the media.
Components that corrupt our politicians, I think, also corrupt mainstream media. It's really difficult for cable outlets to talk about things like income inequality, wealth inequality, when the advertisers that are funding their shows are the same corporations that want to ensure that the same system continues. People watch digital media or new media, they get a completely different message. They focus on the issues that matter or resonate more with the constituency. We need to know one thing. Is the corporate media incompetent?
Corporate media, I can't hear you. Establishment press, where are you? I can't hear you. But the media's position I am clear on. Everything is pro-war, so everything is just framed that way. In this case, I mean, war is inevitable, right? I mean, the defense contractors should get a couple more $1 trillion. You ready for the stunning results? Only 6% of people say they have a great deal of confidence in the press. Wakey, wakey, okay? Progressives don't like the media either. You know why? It's the corporate media. Corporate media sounds like a conspiracy. Wait. Who owns you? Multi-billion-dollar corporations, public corporations. You have to do corporate media because corporations own us. Yeah, that's how it works. We found the perfect person to lead the army, Allison Hartson.
The establishment media works hand in glove with our corporate legislators, and our corporate legislators work hand in glove with the corporation. And we're going to make it so that it's a decentralized force throughout the country so that we can quickly identify stories, quickly identify troll farms, and go in and neutralize the enemy, and then start building responsible media throughout the country and on every platform available.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the show. Anna Kasparian, John Idarola with you.
That's me. John? I'm that one.
What is the damage report of the day?
I'm damaged.
I feel you.
It accumulates, you know. I'm like American infrastructure. I am like overdue for an overhaul.
Yeah.
But no, the news is fun. It's interesting. We got good stories.
We have some good news today. Before we get to the good news, though, there is this story that broke later in the day regarding Ron DeSantis and what his objectives are should he win as president of the United States. And we need to have better standards in America.
Yeah.
We as voters need to hold politicians up to higher standards.
Or any standard.
Or any standard at this point, honestly. And you'll get what I mean as we get into the details of the story, so let's do it.
Of eliminating any agencies, I know conservatives in the past have talked about closing the Department of Education. Would you do that?
So we would do education, we would do commerce, we do energy, and we would do IRS.
Oh, wow, what a shocker. Ron DeSantis is floating the idea of abolishing the IRS. You know, the one government agency that ensures that federal taxes are being paid. Okay. Now, obviously, he's not going to be able to do that. If anything, he'll probably push to further defund the IRS. But of course, what he's trying to message is, let's do away with the bureaucracy, let's do away with the regulations. But let's also keep it real, it ain't gonna happen because all the people surrounding DeSantis are hoping that should he win, they get appointed as the heads of these various federal government agencies. That's how this whole system works. But nonetheless, let's watch more from DeSantis as he tries to spin this into a culture war issue.
If Congress will work with me on doing that, we'll be able to reduce the size and scope of government. But what I'm also going to do, Martha, is be prepared if Congress won't go that far. I'm going to use those agencies to push back against woke ideology and against the leftism that we see creeping into all institutions of American life. So, for example, with Department of Education, we reverse all the transgender sports stuff. Women's sports should be protected. We reverse policies trying to inject the curriculum into our schools. That will all be gone. We will make sure we have an accreditation system for higher ed, which is not trying to foment more things like DEI and CRT. So we'll be prepared to do both. Either way, it'll be a win for conservatives.
It is actually, I gotta say, it is impressive that Ron DeSantis manages to spin everything into culture war issues. Everything. You know,
it was on brand.
That was on brand. This is what its platform is. It's nothing. He will do nothing for you. That is what he is actually saying here, right?
Yeah. Well, either way, it'll be a win for conservatives, certain conservatives. Rich conservatives, it'll be a win for them. Yeah, getting rid of the IRS. I'm trying to figure out who that would benefit. Everybody probably, right? Just everyone evenly, all conservatives, poor conservatives probably would benefit from the elimination of the IRS. How does this work?
I'm just so thirsty at this point. I'm so thirsty for actual discussion and debate about substantive matters from our elected lawmakers. I'm so thirsty for it.
Yeah.
Instead, everything is a performance, everything is theater. Okay, I feel like I'm like forever like affixed to a seat at the Pantages Theater, watching the worst like theater show imaginable. It just won't end. It won't end.
That sounded good at first.
It did, but it
not
didn't.
if the show's bad.
Right.
I don't want that. Yeah, I get your thirst for policy, and like I don't think that if I can speak for you, I don't think that we're unreasonable to want at least some form of conservatives pushing policy. In my pre-show this morning on the Damage Report, I spun a possible sort of an industrial reinvigoration policy for the right wing that relies on vicious xenophobia against China, to call for massive investment into basically American industry that would wipe clean the Chinese dominance on things like building, like they talk about, you know, the wind farms and everything. We don't have the wind farms, they're built in China. Okay, then we'll build it. We'll put massive investments into doing that until nobody wants to buy the Chinese ones. They'll buy ours instead. We're gonna build all of the chips. Like they could ride a wave of xenophobia to a reinvigorated American working industrial base.
John,
but they don't even do that.
Sweet John. Sweet, naive.
Is it not
John.
racist enough?
But John, you are making the mistake of thinking that these lawmakers have any interest in, you know, pressuring corporations to bring jobs back here in the United States.
Give them money. Free money for the rich.
We already do so much of that.
Free money for corporations.
So you're saying subsidize them to basically make up.
Subsidize an energy company that isn't already wildly profitable. It's a novel idea.
Yeah. Look, they have no interest in that. They have no
clearly
interest
not.
in it, right? And look, what corporations and what their corporate donors want more than anything is the freedom and the ability to exploit cheap labor in any country. So if anything, the warmongering, the xenophobic nonsense toward China is going to essentially lead to these corporations moving these jobs to another country, possibly Mexico, for instance. I mean, that pattern or that trend has been ongoing anyway. But you do make a good point. I mean, there are opportunities for Republican lawmakers to actually do something that would be beneficial economically for the American people. And maybe that would mitigate some of the backlash they're experiencing as a result of rolling back reproductive rights, which has not been popular among the electorate. But they've got no interest in that. And of course, it's extremely unlikely that Ron DeSantis would be able to abolish all of these federal agencies. However, I do want to focus a little more on the IRS and the incessant attacks by Republican lawmakers toward the IRS. So just this January, House Republicans had a plan to abolish the IRS. Remember the very silly Fair Tax Act? If you don't remember, I'll remind you. The House of Representatives is planning to vote on a Republican bill that would abolish the national income tax, payroll tax, and estate tax, and replace it with a regressive tax, a single national consumption or sales tax on the purchase of goods and services. If passed, the Fair Tax Act would implement a 23% consumption tax on gross payments and also eliminate the IRS, which supporters say would no longer be needed. I don't know, John, seems like a really well thought out plan.
Well, I mean, if it's not needed, if they don't need it, if the rich don't think that we need it, they are the ones with the money. I guess that they would know. They just keep doing this over and over and over again. It's not popular. It can't win you a national election, but they just keep doing it because there are no standards whatsoever amongst right-wing voters.
Not only do they keep doing it, this effort dates back to the 1990s. So in 1999,
rebooting everything up in here.
They were trying to dismantle, Republicans specifically were trying to dismantle the IRS. Sadly, they have effectively accomplished that goal when it comes to dismantling the IRS and its ability to audit the wealthiest tax dodgers, something that we talk about quite often here. So per a report from the IRS, taxpayers earning $1 million or more were subject to an audit rate of just 0.7% in 2019, which was a sharp decline from 7.2% in 2011. So congratulations, GOP, well done. You did right by your corporate donors who tend to want to dodge their taxes and not pay their fair share. These economic populists, why don't we give them a round of applause? And Ron DeSantis, great performance, great performance. So pathetic. Anyway, let's get to some good news, shall we?
I guess.
Yeah, Supreme Court is wilding out.
Oh yeah.
I don't know what that means really, but I've heard people say it.
I'm gonna check TikTok.
In other contexts, and I just wanted to use it here.
Yeah.
Okay, so they keep making decisions that I don't expect them to make, okay? And they're anti-corporate decisions, which I love. So let's talk about it. In a huge win for workers' rights and protections, the Supreme Court actually ruled against rail company Norfolk Southern and ended up siding with one of their former employees. Now, the case centered on where employees can file lawsuits against these companies. And this particular employee did file a lawsuit against Norfolk Southern in Pennsylvania specifically. So in a 5-4 decision, SCOTUS ruled, yeah, he can file that lawsuit in Pennsylvania. Now let's understand what's actually transpiring here. Now, this story all started back in 2017 when a former Norfolk Southern employee by the name of Robert Mallory was diagnosed with colon cancer. Now, Mallory filed a lawsuit against the company alleging that his illness stemmed from workplace exposure to asbestos and other hazardous materials. He also claimed that the company really failed to provide safety equipment and other resources to keep workers safe. And given the derailing of Norfolk Southern trains, given the cost-cutting efforts that they've taken in recent years, which has made operating these trains less safe, I would not be surprised if we found that the employee's accusations had merit, okay? But nonetheless, although he had never worked in the state of Pennsylvania, Mallory decided to file his lawsuit there. Although he had never worked in Pennsylvania, Mallory filed his lawsuit in the Philadelphia County Court of Common Pleas because his attorneys were from the state and he thought he could get the fairest access to justice there. Now, at the time, Norfolk Southern asserts that being forced to defend the case in Pennsylvania would pose an undue burden, thereby violating its constitutional right to due process. Even though Norfolk Southern owns thousands of miles of track in the Keystone State, the Philadelphia County Court sided with the railroad and dismissed the case. So that was it ended up getting ruled by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. they decided to side with Norfolk Southern, but the Supreme Court of the United States heard the case upon appeal and luckily decided to rule in favor of Mallory, the employee here. Now, let's talk about what the outcome was and what the reasoning was by these justices. The High Court ruled that Pennsylvania's consent by registration law requiring an out-of-state firm to answer in the Commonwealth any suits against it in exchange for status as a registered foreign corporation and the benefits that entails does not violate the due process clause of the 14th Amendment. John, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so we often like to remind the audience of where our expertise ends. And obviously I am not a lawyer, although I am wearing a tie right now. So I can understand why you would be a bit confused.
I mean, you're already qualified if you ask me.
I look lawyer-esque, but I'm not actually, I didn't do it. And I say that because I am sure that I am wrong. And there are very good reasons why this ended up the way it did. And I like the outcome, but I'm not sure. If he didn't work in the state, then theoretically he can sue in any state where they operate. Shouldn't he have to work like in a state where the crime happened to him?
It depends on the state's regulations, right? So in Pennsylvania, in order for businesses to operate there, they have to agree to allow lawsuits to be filed against them in those states.
Yeah,
right?
you
and that's
you
the case in Pennsylvania.
I totally buy that. I'm just saying, does that make common sense?
I don't really care in this case.
No, I understand that.
That's where his lawyers are based. And by the way, okay, so hold on. So as someone who works for the rail company, I mean, if you're operating the trains and the trains go through various states, I mean, couldn't you argue that you've worked in those states?
They said he didn't work in those states.
I don't know if that was the case with him, right?
Yeah.
But his lawyers are based in Pennsylvania. He felt that but okay, so let me ask you
theoretically he could hire lawyers anywhere, but
so he wants to file the lawsuit in Pennsylvania because that's where his lawyers are, and also because he thinks he has the best chance at justice there.
I get it, pragmatically.
There are other states that tend to have certain regulations in place that favor the companies over the best interests of the employees, so I can understand that, right? Right. So why is it that Norfolk Southern gets to dictate where the lawsuit would be filed as opposed to the employee who's filing the lawsuit in the first place?
Well, I don't think they should.
Norfolk Southern wanted him to file the lawsuit in a state that's far friendlier to business interests.
My standard would be where he worked, where he was exposed to the asbestos. That would be my expectation. Obviously I'm not in charge. Again, I'm not a lawyer and I'm also not a king. Yeah, the reason that I bring it up is obviously I like the outcome. We agree on that. I'm already trying to sort of cast my mind forward to how conservatives would sue some company that sells, medication abortion in a different state, but they sue it in Texas so they can get them fined for $10 billion. I don't know if Texas has the same sort of consent by registration law as Pennsylvania, but like I told myself I need to look up who composed the five because sometimes the Supreme Court will do something that can seem really good, but it is setting up a future decision. That's my fear.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit.
I'm not trying to be a contrarian.
No, I'm gonna answer your question. So the individuals, the Supreme Court justices who voted in favor of the employee here included Neil Gorsuch, who wrote the opinion, the majority opinion, joined by Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito. I know this sounds like not good so far, but then you've got Sonia Sotomayor and Ketanji Brown Jackson. It was a 5-4 ruling. Okay,
that's a toughie.
So more on that. At issue, writes the Wall Street Journal, was a Pennsylvania law requiring the companies operating within the state consent to lawsuits filed in Pennsylvania courts, even if the allegations involved conduct that took place elsewhere. So it's really about state law here. Norfolk Southern argued that imposing such liability on the railroad, which is based in Georgia and operates in 22 states plus the District of Columbia, violated the Constitution's due process clause. But the Supreme Court, the majority of Supreme Court justices disagreed with that.
It is incredibly interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know that I've ever heard about something like this.
I didn't know that John was anti-worker, but we've learned something new every day on this show.
Not this particular worker, I hate all of them. They're peasants and they need to be ground into the dirt. No, I'm trying to be consistent. I know it's pointless. There's no, why would somebody who talks about politics on the internet be consistent? I am trying to do that though. It's pointless and it reflects poorly on me and on the network, so I apologize.
So let me give you a little bit of the reasoning from Gorsuch, who again wrote the majority opinion in this case. States required consent to liability in exchange for the rights to exploit the local market and to receive the full range of benefits enjoyed by in-state corporations, he wrote. Norfolk Southern, Gorsuch said, had complied with the Pennsylvania requirement for decades. So he's basically saying, listen, bro, Norfolk Southern, all you executives, you guys agreed to this.
Yeah.
And you've agreed to it and have been agreeing to it for literally decades. Now the chickens have come home to roost. Okay, so the lawsuit has been filed in Pennsylvania. You have agreed to lawsuits being filed against you in the state of Pennsylvania in order to operate in the state. So, sorry. Now, there's an interesting perspective from one of our members, and I actually, no, this is good, this is good. I actually think there might be something to this. So Repect, the political catboy, writes in and says, I think the Supreme Court and the Democrats at large, at a large degree, have noticed that people are upset. The cost of living is just unreal and unsustainable. The corporations and SCOTUS have gone just a little too far with their recent antics and scandals. People aren't just noticing, they're taking notice. People are unionizing and coming together. Basically, the point that our viewers try to make here is maybe the Supreme Court is like, are we the baddies? You know, and they're a little worried about distrust toward these institutions, and maybe they're just trying to be good boys and girls for now, and rule in a way that actually favors employees over employers. I don't know if that's really the motivating factor here. What I do know is that the ruling that we're talking about today, the ruling that we discussed on the show recently, which was also pretty pro-worker, these are good decisions from a very conservative Supreme Court. And I'll take what we can get.
And the election one yesterday too.
Right.
We are fair.
Right.
They're insane radicals.
I mean, he's got this disdain for workers all of a sudden though.
I felt fair when I said it. But anyway, yes, we give credit when credit is due.
Right.
They're insane radicals. One of them is a drunk and a sexual assaulter. Another belonged to a Christian cult, but they did some good stuff.
Mixed bag.
You decide which is which.
We got to take a break. When we come back, we've got more news for you, so don't miss it. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the show. In our members section, Boomer Dragon Cat, I did not know that your husband is Cuban. But she writes in and says, Anna, my Cuban husband says, "Acere como está" to Christian since he's in the studio with you. So, you like that? All right. Third Party Time says, does DeSantis know the Department of Energy oversees our nuclear stockpile? No, I don't think he does. And thank you for mentioning that. I wanted to mention that, but I forgot. And he wants to get rid of the Department of Education. What an idiot. Don't shoot, I'm the goalkeeper says, surprised Gorsuch ruled in favor of the worker. He literally ruled that a worker whose truck broke down was obligated to freeze to death rather than leave his cargo. I know.
That's true.
Yeah.
I feel like
there's
Gorsuch
something going on.
Gorsuch has done some stuff over the years that's not. He's not as crazy as some of them, I think. He's not Alito or Thomas.
There's very fine people on that side.
I guess.
All right, let's move on. We've got in our Twitch community, Kami Kazone, who says, my husband is an independent. He will never vote for Trump ever. Mr. Unknown says, uh-oh, your real husband and work husband are in the same room. They're friendly.
Don't put Bart on blast. He's standing right there.
Mad as Jank says, hey all, Anna is on fire tonight. I like that. I like that. All right, I'm sure there's some super chats. I want to read as many as I can.
Were you super excited to do a solo first hour again? It's been weeks.
Excited is not the word.
You usually look forward to it so much.
No, I do like.
Take the reins.
I do like it. It is a heavy lift production-wise, so I've been at my computer from 5 in the morning till the time I got in here. So like it was a lot, but
most of that was Diablo, but yeah.
But I do really. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? Underground gamer
clicking away.
All right. I'm gonna read some comments from our super chats. Bo writes in and says, since you're still catching up, maybe in the bonus episode, have John play the clip of he and Brett covering the LA school board president's speech. What a gem that was. Anyway, good to have you back.
That was good.
I have no idea what that's about.
Best woman in America.
Interesting. Okay. Mohit writes in and says, hi, Queen Anna of House Kasparian, the first of her name, Queen of TYT, protector of journalism, Khaleesi of LA, the authentic breaker of ignorance and mother of Charlie. And then there's John Idarola. He's king of the dorks.
It's concise. I like it. Mother of Charlie.
Oh, my little baby boy. I have to put a little sweater on him because he's got seasonal allergies. He's like chewing himself to death.
Oh my God, my dog is too.
It's so bad.
Oh my God.
But like the sweater, he looks like a little scholar. It looks like a little, like, what are those?
Grad student.
Yeah, it's so cute. Anyway, Asha, thank you so much, or Asha, thank you so much for this. All right, there's a crazy story that was just sent to me that I feel like I need to read. I know that we just went live and this is super unprofessional.
Oh my God, what is it?
14% of respondents said they have a favorable view of Hunter Biden. Just 4% say they have a favorable view, and 10% say they have a somewhat favorable. Some poll that shows that among some people responding to this poll, they favor Hunter Biden over Donald Trump. I gotta read the details. And then give them to you correctly as soon as I have all the information I need. Okay, with that said though, let's move on to some other news, John, shall we? Okay. I just need everyone to relax with the labeling of employees and their behavior at work, because there's like the loud quitting, the quiet quitting, they're normal people who have different personalities, but that is not what Pew Research Center thinks for some reason. There's a new annoying buzzword for how employees act in the workplace, because apparently employees aren't just quiet quitting anymore. A new Gallup report, so it wasn't Pew, it was Gallup, reports that almost 1 in 5 employees in America are loud quitting. So John, just take a little guess. What is loud quitting?
Something stupid, probably, if I had to guess. I would assume it's people who are, maybe they're trying to get fired, so they're like, interrupting things, maybe making inappropriate jokes, trying to get fired to get unemployment.
Some of you might wonder, some people wonder, why it is that someone wouldn't just quit. Why are you trying to get fired? But if I'm not mistaken, you're unable to collect unemployment benefits unless you're fired, correct?
I think generally, it depends on the state, the specifics, but yeah, generally that's the idea.
So there is, a reasonable and logical reason why someone would want to get fired as opposed to quitting. But nonetheless, like we mentioned, the term comes from a Gallup report titled State of the Global Workplace. The report surveyed the employee engagement of American workers and sorted them into 3 categories: thriving at work, quiet quitting, and loud quitting. Okay, so as you can see from the graphic we're showing you, thriving at work, 31% of the respondents accounted for that, 52% accounted for quiet quitting, and 17% accounted for loud quitting. Where do you think Cenk would fall in this category if he was employed by us as opposed to us being employed by him?
I mean,
loud quitting category?
Well, he's loud, but I don't think he's quitting. He's engaged, and you know he's engaged because he's screaming and pounding the desk.
Totally.
So I think he's a fourth category.
So for those who aren't familiar with what is known as quiet quitting, that's when you put up like minimum effort at the workplace, like you've basically checked out, but you're coasting. You're doing the bare minimum just to get by. And then there's the definition of loud quitting. Let's get to that. These employees take actions that directly harm the organization, undercutting its goals and opposing its leaders. At some point along the way, the trust between employee and employer was severely broken, or the employee has been woefully mismatched to a role, causing constant crises. But why do only 31% of American workers feel engaged? Well, according to the report, the United States tied with East Asia for the region where most workers feel stress. Okay, so the report asked workers if they felt a lot of stress and or anger during their previous day at work. And the results are pretty bad. So 52% of the respondents said that they experienced stress. I'm actually shocked that that wasn't higher. Although they're asking about their previous day at work. Yeah, they're asking about one day. 18% reported feeling anger.
Jeez.
Yeah. So I don't really know what to make of this. I don't really think there's any phenomenon here. I don't think there's really any I don't think it's necessary to label workers in these ways. I just think that different people have different personalities and some are more expressive than others. I know that when I'm unhappy, I'm expressive. I'm so expressive that I will air my grievances on this show, and it's a little awkward for Cenk sometimes, but it is what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the difference though is that for the first time in history, there are some employees that really like their jobs, and others who don't. So we need terms for it because that's never happened before.
Never happened before. It's totally new.
I hate this so much.
Yeah.
I want to take the English language and not let other people use it because they can't be trusted with it. None of those category names should be what they are. You are not, just because you're engaged, that doesn't mean you're thriving. It's from the point of view, by the way, of the employer that you're engaged. Thriving is from the point of view of the employee. Those are not the same thing.
That's such a great point.
Just because they're working hard doesn't mean that they're benefiting. The quiet quitting, they're not quitting. They're just doing literally the job. The bare minimum is the job. If you wanted it to be more, you'd raise the minimum.
That's such a good point, John.
It's not
you're
quitting.
making good points.
And loud quitting, you're disagreeing and stuff. First of all, they're not quitting. I don't know why I need to define to you what quitting means.
Right.
They're like undercutting the job. They're sabotaging. First of all, that's definitely a much smaller percentage than they're saying. That's actively attempting to undermine what's going on. It just means people who don't necessarily agree with everything that management is doing. They have a different way of communicating or whatever. I'm sure there's a generational thing to that. None of those terms are what they should be.
No,
and the second one, by the way, is only what it is because quiet quitting was already a thing. Now everything has to be blank quitting.
Yep.
I don't trust people with slang, basically.
So why do workers feel what they're feeling at the workplace, right? We mentioned how more than half of them feel or reported feeling stressed about the previous day at work. And then a smaller percentage said that they felt anger. Well, there are multiple reasons why these respondents say they felt what they felt. What is stressing out the world's employees? Gallup survey does not ask for specifics, so fantastic. That said,
because it's for employers.
I know.
And they don't care.
But that said, okay, the report did ask employees who identified as quiet quitters what they would change about their jobs, and I'm curious what you think about how they reported, in this report. So. 41% of the quiet quitters wanted to change the engagement or culture within their workplace. For example, that might mean more creative freedom, more approachable managers, clearer goals, and or better pathways to promotion. And look, let's pour one out for the PMC for a second, right? Because the other thing that stands out.
Military corporation?
No, professional managerial class.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because we're
Blackwater. We miss you, man.
Okay, but no, in all seriousness, middle management, I know that they're despised by most employees. Like, I'm not trying to do a cover story for them, okay? So just calm down for a second. But the point I do want to make is being a good, effective manager that keeps people happy is really hard because every employee has different wants or needs. Some people want to be micromanaged, believe it or not. I'm not one of those people. I can't stand being micromanaged. I lose it. Like my happiness level takes a massive dip the second I feel like I'm being micromanaged. Some people want to, be creative in their jobs and they want to expand their role within the workplace. Others are like, no, don't add more to my plate. I'm good, So you have to really make an effort to get to know the people you're working with, the people who report to you. And more importantly, I think at the end of the day, everyone craves the same thing. Everyone craves respect and everyone wants to be listened to, right? Like, hear me out. And I think as long as management does that, and as long as people are not being mistreated in the workplace, and as long as they're getting paid a decent wage or salary, everyone's good. Like, we all know that we need to work, we all need to make a living. Let's try to make this process as painless as possible.
Yeah, that what you just laid out, great guiding philosophy for an economy that we don't have.
That's true, yeah.
That would be good. We would actually thrive under that.
True.
Yeah.
28% of the quiet quitters wanted better pay and benefits, higher salaries, gas vouchers for commuting costs.
Interesting.
Sounds pretty good. Maybe a little perk that we should band together and ask for.
More people might be comfortable coming back to the office if
never mind
some of the transportation costs were defrayed.
No.
I think you're already here.
Strike that from the record.
You're here right now.
No, I know. I just don't like.
Oh, you don't want other people to be here.
No, I love other people, but we have a shared workspace and we gotta read. And we got to prepare the show.
She's mad because I was talking very loudly about the WWE in the middle of the office pod today.
Pretty much, very distracting. Finally, 16% of quiet quitters wanted their jobs to better support their well-being. Specifically, employees named less overtime, longer breaks, more flexibility to work from home as some of the ways that could happen. And the other 15% of responses were simply categorized as miscellaneous.
Makes sense.
It is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, look, some of that, I guess, more people have access to post-pandemic. I mean, you're a little bit more free to determine things like breaks in some jobs, depends. I mean, obviously there are some people doing remote work that are highly surveilled, but yeah.
I gotta end this with Insider's headline, which was published just today. First, there was quiet quitting. Now, it's become grumpy staying.
I prefer grumpy staying.
I do too, because that is more accurate.
That is more accurate. Insider, you win the internet.
They do. All right, let's move on to Trump and how oblivious he is about the way he looks. So, Donald Trump, the thinnest skinned man in America, is whining about Fox News allegedly, intentionally using unappealing and unattractive photos of him in their broadcasts. So on Truth Social early this morning, he wrote the following. 3 people in New Hampshire asked me why Fox News uses such horrible pictures of me when doing or promoting a story. The coloring, distortions, everything are just so bad. Because he's a model in real life, and so they use the unflattering photos of him to lie to us all about the way he actually looks.
Well, and even then, you have to work to make him look bad because the raw material is almost unassailable.
Like, you know what? We might be guilty too. I haven't seen a single attractive photo of Donald Trump. Look at that. I mean, look, but honestly, we did do him dirty there. Let's keep it real.
Yeah,
we did do him dirty there.
Well, that was Getty did him dirty right there. Damn, Getty.
Let me give you the rest. He says, they must sit and look at 100 different shots and then take the 10 absolute worst. My staff has even complained about it for months, but to no avail. Fox is just, can you freaking imagine? Can you imagine being the former president of the United States, hitting up your staff to hit up Fox News to complain about the images they're using of you?
Imagine Obama doing this.
I can't.
I love this, and I don't Is it not obvious why I love this? I don't mean just because the photos or whatever. It's because if we are to believe that what he is saying is true, not about whether they're doing it, but that 3 people came up to him in New Hampshire and his staff is complaining for months. The world that apparently exists is every day Donald Trump has people coming up to him saying, "You look like hell in that picture, man. They are ruining you. Look at this thing. You look terrible." I've never hoped that one of Trump's bleats is true.
It's
as much as I do right now.
It's 1000% a lie. Not a single person has approached him to say like, "Hey bro, I think Fox News is intentionally using unflattering images of you."
If I ever meet him, I will. I will point it out.
You know what? Good. You're an American hero.
He likes it.
Now, he also says, this is the craziest part of his post. We're really bearing the lead here. He says, Fox is just bad news, but I'm leading in the polls by record numbers, so perhaps their bull is just not working. They are down 37% for a reason. Is he alleging that people have soured on Fox News because Fox is not using flattering images of him? Could it be?
He said crazier things today.
That's true, but could it be that the departure of Tucker Carlson played a role? So
I love the idea that the solution to their Tucker problems is to just Photoshop like really hot thirst traps of Trump, just wall to wall. It's like him showing like sweat beaded abs. And people are like, I don't even miss Tucker, man. That's hot.
You know those stories that we've done in the past featuring like Trump NFTs and how he's like just ripped in every single one of those? Do you think Trump genuinely sees himself? Like, you know how there's body dysmorphia?
Yeah.
Do you think he might have the reverse of that, where he looks in the mirror and he sees the like 6-pack and like the
body anamorphia?
Maybe.
Yeah, he sees himself as a hot cat.
I wish I had that. Like, why can't we have that?
Some people have that.
They're usually men.
Probably, yeah. Well, the standards are lower, it's easier. Does he actually see himself as very conventionally attractive? I don't know. He's got to at least a little bit, and the reason is, he obviously is a very, very vain person. I think that we all understand that. He is very interested in women. He desperately wants women to be attracted to him. He desperately wants to be seen as a virile, vigorous alpha man. And yet for decades, he has done seemingly nothing to make that happen. He has the fake hair or whatever, and he tans his face. But aside from that, he has never asked anyone for style advice. He's never asked anyone, hey, are suits supposed to be tailored? Like, never. And don't talk about my suit, I don't have much money. And I've gained a lot of weight. But anyway, like he could hire Marvel trainers.
No, you guys.
To train him. He doesn't do any of the stuff you would do.
I know you guys, some of you frown on elective cosmetic surgeries. I totally understand that. I disagree with you, and I think that wealthy people have an obligation to us all to always look good. They have the resources for it, but they do. And by the way, you don't even have to go so far as to get elective surgery. They have the money, the resources for trainers, for personal chefs. They could go get a massage and a facial multiple times a week and it wouldn't break the bank, okay?
That's amazing.
I mean, I would try all sorts of cutting edge beauty treatments at the spa. Like, why not? Why not? Oh, it's a $500 facial, why not? I'm allegedly a billionaire, right?
It is weird.
It's
and
weird.
By the way, like you might think, well, why does he have to do that? Well, no, I don't think that they're all obligated to be hot or whatever.
Yep.
But he is the person who projects himself in that way. Joe Biden doesn't give us any reason to believe that he thinks that he's hot or whatever. Bernie Sanders clearly doesn't care if people think he's attractive. But Trump has always desperately wanted that approval. And so it's so weird to have the massive gap between his obvious need for this attention and his complete lack of interest in actually pursuing it.
So look, he didn't clarify which specific images or photos he was talking about, but we went through some recent Fox clips that used B-roll of Donald Trump. Great work, Kate. And overall, they didn't use particularly terrible pictures of him because most pictures of him are particularly terrible. So let's watch.
Former President Trump firing back after he was indicted over his handling of classified documents.
We start this hour without Patrick Henry, but with Donald Trump. Audio emerging of President Trump allegedly discussing highly confidential documents detailing a blueprint for a possible attack on Iran.
The tape is now being used as evidence in the special counsel's indictment over Trump's handling of classified information.
It's also important to note that, look, these indictments always read to defense counsel as horrific documents. Every case I've ever had, when I've read the indictment, my heart has just sunk.
John, I'm beginning to think that it's not about the images that they decided to use. I have a feeling that it's more about the content of those broadcasts. Could it be that former President Donald Trump doesn't take kindly to any news coverage about the criminal indictments that he's dealing with? Could it be? I could be wrong.
It's possible that they shot him from his unflattering side, which is outside where there's light. No, I actually think based on those, the last photo, I thought if I were him, I wouldn't like that. But other than that, those were above average images of Donald Trump, and they shared like several things in common. They're all good photos, I think, fairly objectively, good saturation, good lighting, and all that. But they're also all quite zoomed out.
Yeah.
The issue with Trump, and look, this is true of a lot of people. It's just a little bit of arm's reach. The closer you get, it's rougher. And these cameras are very powerful, so getting really close to Trump's, it only gets better as you get closer. No, with Trump, it's the close-ups that are rough. I think that I think it's just unfair to say that Fox News is trying to make him look bad. I'm not being sarcastic anymore. They're not doing that. People do that. They're not doing that.
But look, we are going to give him a little, at least I'm going to give him a little bit of credit, or at least lend a little bit of merit to his argument here, if he's specifically talking about Fox and Friends, because they used a sequence of photos of Trump. So let's take a look at that, and then you tell me if you change your mind.
If you look at polling for Joe Biden, he is vastly underwater. And then when you look at independents, he's polling at 26% approval. Among those folks, the type of people who decide elections, or suburban women, they're angry about the education system right now in terms of what they're teaching. We talked about the test scores because we're focusing on letters and LGBTQI+2S and race.
No, it's pretty bad. There wasn't a single, like those were like, every photo was like mouth is open. And
those are worse. Yeah, it's not necessarily that they're specifically trying to make him look bad, but why are you basically taking a still frame from a video?
Yeah.
Like that's like in motion. You don't need to do that. You have access to the exact same B-roll as the rest of Fox News.
Look at that picture. No,
yeah, that's not a great photo. That's a weird expression. I think he could take a little bit of issue. However, he is making a strong claim against Fox, implying that they're effectively sort of defaming him in terms of his appearance.
No, come on.
I want to defend Fox News, and I'm gonna do that tomorrow on the damage report. And the way that I'm gonna defend them is I'm going to show Donald Trump the photos they could use if they wanted to destroy him, and they're not using those. So I think this will be a strong defense. Tune into the damage report. Sharon Reed will be joining us.
All right, I love it. For now, though, we're gonna take a brief break. When we come back, we'll talk about the buzzwords that Republican presidential candidates are using the most in their campaigning. And I think it tells you a lot about where the priorities are for the Republican Party as a whole. That and more coming up. Jupiter in our YouTube members section says, dealing with people is a hell of a job. That was probably in reference to our loud quitting story that we did. M. Brown says, quiet quitting, doing exactly what you were paid to do and nothing else, also known as your job. Marco Antonio says, Cenk pounds that desk daily. Stop, you little pervert.
They could have worded that a lot of different ways.
No, he does.
That was a choice.
Does you know.
Yeah.
You're never excited to do the bye-bye.
I do the bye-bye's great.
You know.
I haven't missed a bye-bye in years.
You could do better. Andrew St. Dennis says, it's not that he thinks he's attractive, but he does want everyone to think that, and more importantly, wants you to tell him he's attractive. He is not attractive, sorry. Not for me. Maybe for other people who like his money, but not for me. All right, let's go to, let's see. I'm gonna do a rapid fire round of member comments. Give me a second. John, you can help me out here. Okay.
I could have.
You could have. TYT.com members, we've got Squirrely Siege who says, politicians are actors and corporations are the producers funding the show. 100% great way of putting it. Ashura Izumi says, Trump's bedroom closet must be full of Republican balls, right?
Oh my God.
Right by all the stolen documents. Yeah, I mean, look, I'm gonna give Chris Christie credit. Cenk's been giving him a lot more credit than I have, but Chris Christie really is the only one who's willing to like battle it out with Trump and name him, you know?
Yeah, coming to the town hall, I gave him a ton of credit and he has not gone anywhere yet.
Yeah,
it's
totally. Nebethet says, as a woman who never wears dresses, I live vicariously through you with your gorgeous dress collection. You are so classy, and if I wore dresses, they would be like yours. Thank you. Aww. So sweetest thing happened when I was in Florida. You know, we have family there. I have nieces and nephews there. And one of my nieces, who's like 4 years old, after I was actually wearing this dress, she came up to me and she's like, Tia Anna, I love your dresses, they're so pretty. And so I told her that I'm gonna save them all for her. So when she's older, she can have them. She's so sweet.
Oh, that's awesome.
Kids are so sweet and so innocent, and it just like reminds you of the good in the world.
Yeah.
Kids and dogs.
Yeah.
Yeah, animals, I think.
Mostly dogs, but yeah.
Yeah. Lick Mccarthy, you're about to be a dad.
Damn.
All right.
Gotta change my tune.
Well, so much for that rapid fire round of comments. I did my best. Let's get back to the show. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to TYT. Anna and John with you. I started reading a comment during our social break, but then we ran out of time. So I want to make sure that I read Litch McConnell's comment here, and it's about the terrible ectopic pregnancy story I did in the first hour. After defrauding women to try to trick them away from abortions until it's legally too late is somehow not reproductive coercion. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
It is. There's like genuine evil in this country, and it makes me sad thinking about it literally every day for my livelihood. But anyway, let's move on to some other news. What kind of words are Republican candidates for the presidential election using? Which buzzwords are they leaning on during their campaigning? Well, the Washington Post did an analysis of this, and I actually think it's pretty fascinating because the words that they use and repeat the most tend to say a lot about what their priorities are during the electoral process. And so why don't we go ahead and start with Donald Trump, who is currently the top dog according to the polling. They provided a visualized, a visualization of the words that he uses the most. And if you take a look at it, you'll notice that immigration remains a top issue for the GOP and is especially prominent for Trump. He uses the word border a lot. He also uses the word great a lot. So make America great again. He uses the word Biden a lot, which makes sense since that's his main political opponent. And he also uses radical a lot. John, what say you about these buzzwords?
Can we put that up again?
Sure.
Because he really only has a few words that he used. They've colored a few of them like yellow to point them out, but there's a lot that are very similar to that size.
Yeah, like he used country the most.
Country a lot. He used the word Trump almost as much as he used the word Biden.
I know.
You should not say your own name nearly that much. It's a super simplistic way of communicating. We've long noted that he summarizes everything as more than anyone could ever expect. It's worse than anyone thinks. Like we've never seen. Nobody knows what's going on. Like, because he doesn't have specificity. He doesn't have actual information that he can invest into a thing. But it works. People like it. They, for some reason, see it not as ignorant, but as authentic.
Yeah, and the thing is, he uses the word border far more than the other Republican candidates, which signals to me that he intends to lean into his bag of old tricks, right? So making a big deal about the border. And look, after doing that story about Marjorie Greene and how she, served as an obstacle to funding the Department of Homeland Security, which of course is tasked with securing the border, I don't believe any of these people genuinely support the issues they purport to care about, right? Like it's just a prop for their political campaigning. I mean, Trump bragged about building a wall at the border. We know based on the evidence that's been reported on incessantly, that is not what happened.
Yeah.
So it's just they want the cookies without actually doing anything. Which, by the way, I don't really mind when it comes to some of the evil policies that they want to implement.
Yeah, I'd prefer that they not do it, but yeah, and I'm glad that you have that because the fact that he is still talking about the border specifically more than the other candidates is, look, we all know that whatever message he gives, the stump speech that he does, it's gonna be xenophobic, hateful nonsense. But there are different flavors of it. And a lot of the Republicans have moved on. Like they'll still attack migrants, caravans, all that, but they don't focus on that stuff. The new flavor is attacking the LGBTQ community.
Yeah, that's their target of choice for the
exactly.
moment. Yeah.
And Trump is going to do that. He can't not. The base demands it. But I think for him, it comes more naturally to him to hate migrants.
By the way, like, does the base demand it? Because that is, so the anti-LGBTQ garbage leading up to the midterms didn't really help Republicans much.
It helped them in primaries. Again, it's like the Trump thing. I don't think it's 50% of the country, and it's certainly not 70% of the country, but it might be 20 to 28% of the country. Like it's basically, it's that same, the worst quarter of the country that often comes up in conversations about Trump. They are the literal worst. They're not enough to win a national election. They're not even enough to win state elections, even in areas that are ostensibly red or purple, like Georgia. But to win a Republican primary, they're way more engaged than anyone else.
Yeah, the Republican Party genuinely has a conundrum on its hands because the primary outcome really runs counter to their desire to win elections.
Yeah.
Because once you move over to the general, it doesn't matter how much these Trump-backed far-right candidates try to like temper their messaging and make it seem like they're reasonable and moderate. Their previous campaigning during the primary makes it abundantly clear they're in line with Donald Trump, and elections at this point are mostly decided by independent voters, which is a growing faction of the electorate. And I think that it would be a mistake to assume that independents are the same as they were like back in the 1990s or early aughts. They're actually far more informed than previous independent voters. They just don't like either party, right? Like I kind of fall in that category right now. Like if we had open primaries here in California, I would definitely re-register as an independent, 100%. But then I wouldn't be able to vote in Democratic primaries, and that would be a problem because Democratic primaries matter. But anyway, getting back to Republicans, I don't know what they plan on doing. Like I don't like the so-called moderate Republicans who see this as a problem, and it is a problem to be sure.
Yeah.
Don't really have a solution for it. So I think it's giving Democrats a lot more confidence, and it's also teaching them all the wrong lessons because they don't really feel like they need to do much more to appeal to Democratic voters. Yeah, it's interesting stuff. Anyway, let's move on to Ron DeSantis. Which words does he use the most during his campaigning? So he's used Florida, A lot of times, 41 times, according to the analysis here, which makes sense, right? Florida is booming right now. There's a lot of positive press about Florida, and he wants to brag about his leadership in the state. So there's that. He also, tries to take some jabs at Trump by mentioning how he got reelected when Trump didn't. And so that's probably when Florida comes up as well. So DeSantis also brought up Fauci and COVID several times. There's another interesting way that DeSantis stands apart. So several GOP candidates use the word woke in their kickoff speeches, including Trump, who, like DeSantis, promotes parental rights and denounces critical race theory. But DeSantis leans more heavily into the new lexicon of the culture wars. He's the only contender whose kickoff speech decried DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, and ESG, a form of socially and environmentally conscious investing. No, that's all DeSantis is about. It's all about the anti-woke messaging all day, every day. I'm
surprised that word didn't come up more often. That's all he really has.
Right.
Trump even jokes about how often people like him use that term.
And DeSantis needs to find a way to differentiate himself from Trump because everyone sees him as a Trump creation, right? He tries to mimic Trump, even with his hand gestures. So he's decided, all right, Trump isn't really going into the woke category too much, so I'm just gonna really lean into that heavily. All right, so then there's Mike Pence. He's got no shot. I mean, I feel like we're wasting your time even talking about him, but he's stuck in a different era in America because he's like, you know what's a winning strategy? I'm gonna keep talking about my religion and I'm gonna keep talking about how I wanna ban abortions. People are gonna love it. So let's take a look at his bubbles. So he brings up the Constitution a lot. As the Post notes, the words Constitution, God, and life stand out for Pence. He uses Constitution a lot because of what he did on January 6th, so he brags about that. And that might be the only area where I would give him credit, his refusal to go along with Trump's nonsense on January 6th. God and life, though, represent his radical anti-abortion positions. And as we've talked about before, the anti-abortion stuff is not popular among voters. Even like, it depends on the polling, but in some polling, a slim majority of Republicans are like, no, we don't want to ban abortion in the first trimester. Other polling is close to 50%. We just talked about a poll out of Florida in regard to Ron DeSantis' decision to push for a 6-week abortion ban, something that he accomplished. And even, close to 50% of Republican voters are like, no, no, we don't like this.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if Pence wants to go in this direction, by all means, have at it. But like, where have you been over the last, few decades?
Yeah, exactly.
Where have you been over the last week? Does he not look like who are his consultants?
I don't know. Again, I mean, the issue incentives-wise is always going to be that you do not have to run for the presidency because you want to win the presidency. You can run for a lot of other reasons. It sucks that that's a way that people just like start a podcast, sell a book, whatever. He definitely does not think that he has a chance of winning. I don't even know what he's selling. Cameo appearances, I don't know.
Look at that face.
But he's definitely not gonna get it. We Fox and Friends him, is what we did. But anyway, Trump is gonna kill him.
They're not buddies anymore.
No, not at all.
Let's go to Nikki Haley.
Yeah.
So Nikki Haley has used the word America quite a bit. As you can see, Nikki Haley's speech struck a more, constructive tone than most of the other candidates, with words like proud, together, strong, and love appearing more often in her speech than the others. Only Senator Tim Scott's speech was as upbeat as Haley's. I wonder why that is. You've got a woman, right? Look, let's just keep it real. Women and candidates who happen to be black or with a different background, I feel like there's more pressure to seem agreeable and friendly and to, like, they're held to a different standard.
Definitely.
That's what I'm referring to. So
yeah. Overall, I think that this is interesting. I don't like that they took the Nikki Haley thing and they basically stripped the words of context. She's doing all sorts of like anti-woke, anti-trans stuff, but she said the word together, so I guess it's more upbeat. Not if you're part of one of those groups.
It's not registering because it's not as like aggressive as what you hear from Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis.
I guess.
So, and then finally, Chris Christie, which words does he use the most? Chris Christie went hard on the idea that politicians like Trump and Biden makes the country smaller and we should be bigger instead. Unfortunately for Christie, Trump ended up picking up on the fact that he uses words like big often. And so he mocked him on Truth Social, a story that we covered earlier this week. Anyway, notice that words like economic improvement or economic stability or wages,
retirement, insurance,
none
housing.
of that, healthcare, none of that.
Yeah.
Just a bunch of culture war nonsense. That's all they stand for, and that's all you're gonna get. All right, that does it for our main show. Bonus episode for our members is next, tyt.com/join. See you there.
Our audience has given us everything, so we couldn't be more connected. When we first started, people would start giving us directions and say, okay, the mics are too large, move.